The sun crested the valley rim, stretching long, sharp shadows across the dirt track. The traveler stood at the intersection where the main road widened toward the horizon, and a faint, narrow trail veered sharply toward the high ground. He held the map flat against his palms, tracing the ink lines with a calloused thumb. The wind surged suddenly, whipping through the tall grass. He stood motionless, eyes shifting between the well-worn path ahead and the steep, jagged incline of the hidden trail. He thought of the ancient words, the promise that a higher hand would order his steps if he only acknowledged the path set before him. The paper crinkled as he folded it tight, pressing the map into his pack. He did not look back at the easy road. He stepped onto the narrow trail, his boots finding purchase on the loose earth. The ascent began immediately. He climbed until the valley was nothing more than a memory below him, his focus fixed entirely on the path that climbed toward the light. The trail steepened, turning into a vertical struggle against loose shale and jagged rock. His breath came in ragged, uneven gasps that echoed against the canyon walls. He reached for a handhold, but the stone shifted under his weight. He fell forward, palms slamming into the sharp grit of the path. The sting was immediate, blood blooming across his skin, but he did not linger on the pain. He pushed himself upright, wiped his hands on his legs, and continued upward. The terrain finally leveled into a small, shaded grove dominated by a sprawling, ancient oak. Below its roots, a stream rushed over smooth, rounded stones, the water clear and cold. He collapsed into the shade, the silence of the grove a sharp contrast to the roar of his own exertion. He cupped his hands in the current, the icy water numbing his scraped palms as he drank. The rhythm of the stream settled his pulse. He sat back against the rough bark, watching the water swirl and dance over the stones. He stood and turned his gaze toward the path ahead. The final ridge gave way to a vast, golden plateau that stretched toward the horizon. He stood for a moment, letting the expansive view settle his lungs, but the air felt charged with static. To the west, the sky had bruised into a deep, sickly purple. Clouds rolled over the peaks like a tidal wave, blotting out the sun. He turned his gaze toward the cluster of low structures huddled near the cliff edge. A group of villagers scrambled in the dirt, their movements frantic and uncoordinated. They were dragging heavy timber, piling loose stones against the wind, but the structure remained skeletal and weak. The wind howled, tearing at the thatch and scattering tools across the plateau. The traveler watched them, his own journey pulling him forward, yet the sound of terror anchored him to a spot. He saw a woman struggle to lift a beam that was clearly too heavy, her hands slipping on the slick wood as the first fat drops of rain began to pelt the ground. The storm was no longer a distant threat. It was a wall of pressure closing in. He looked at the path ahead, then back at the exposed, desperate figures. The choice hung in the air, sharp and unavoidable. To walk away was to leave them to the mercy of the gale. To stay was to abandon his own progress into the unknown. He dropped his pack into the mud without a second thought. The traveler lunged toward the struggling villagers, grabbing a heavy, jagged stone that had slipped from their grasp. The rain turned the ground into a slick slurry, making every step a gamble against the wind. He wedged the stone into the base of the wall, his muscles screaming as he pressed his weight against the shifting timber. The storm roared, a relentless force trying to tear their progress apart. He signaled to the others, his voice barely audible over the gale, and they moved in unison to brace the frame. For an hour, he hauled rock after rock, his hands raw and bleeding, his breath coming in sharp, wet bursts. At one point, the wind caught the roof, and the entire structure groaned, threatening to buckle. He threw his shoulder against the main support, anchoring it with his own body, until the others could drive the final stakes into the earth. The wall held. As the wind howled outside, he leaned against the damp, solid stone, his chest heaving. In the sudden, relative stillness of the interior, the weight of his past mistakes seemed to settle and then dissolve. He realized that in the act of building this refuge, he had found his own. The forgiveness he had sought was not a destination, but a presence found in the service of others. He sat in the dim light, watching the storm rage harmlessly against the barrier they had forged together. The tempest vanished as quickly as it had arrived. Morning light pierced the retreating clouds, striking the plateau and washing the world in a clean, brilliant gold. The traveler stepped out from the shelter, his boots crunching on the damp, firm earth. The air felt thin and sharp, carrying the scent of wet stone and new growth. He looked back at the villagers, who were already emerging to assess the damage, and offered a steady hand to help them clear the debris. A profound stillness settled in his chest, a quiet certainty that replaced the old restless ache. He did not look for a map. He did not search for a sign. He simply turned toward the rising sun, his stride long and unburdened. He moved, not as a man driven by the need for validation, but as a servant, walking in a light he had finally learned to carry within. The path ahead was no longer a mystery to be solved, but a journey to be walked. True peace and direction come when we stop seeking approval from people and start living for God. When we understand who we are in Him, we no longer feel lost. He guides us.